It's interesting how much attention we give to generations. Boomers are debated constantly. Millennials are analyzed endlessly. Gen Z is examined like a social experiment. But one generation sits quietly between them, rarely discussed, rarely explained. Generation X. Born roughly between the mid-1960s and 1980, they're often described in vague terms: independent, detached, low drama. They're the coworkers who don't complain, the parents who don't overshare, the people who helped shape the modern world without feeling the need to announce it. What most people miss is this: Generation X's psychology was shaped by a very specific kind of absence. They were the first large-scale generation of latchkey kids. Imagine being a child in the late 1970s or early 1980s. You come home from school to an empty house. Both parents are working. There's no phone in your pocket, no cameras watching, no one checking in. You let yourself inside. You handle your own routine. You wait. By the mid-1980s, studies showed that millions of children regularly spent their afternoons alone. For Gen X, this wasn't unusual. It was normal. Growing up like this didn't just create independence, it trained their nervous systems early. They learned that responsibility arrived before comfort, that mistakes had consequences, and those consequences were immediate. Psychologists describe this kind of environment as high contingency. Actions lead quickly to outcomes, without emotional buffering or negotiation. Over time, this wires the brain to anticipate consequences instinctively. That's why Gen X often thinks several steps ahead, sometimes without realizing it. They also learned early that promises don't always hold. They watched divorce rates rise while adults talked about stability. They saw loyalty rewarded with layoffs. They were told to work hard and follow the rules, then watched those rules change. So when Gen X seems cautious or skeptical, it isn't bitterness, it's pattern recognition. They don't expect disaster. They just know that certainty is fragile. This mindset explains their relationship with privacy. Imagine growing up before digital permanence. Mistakes faded, embarrassment passed. So the idea of broadcasting your inner life feels unnecessary, even dangerous. It's not that they don't understand technology, it's that they understand exposure. For Gen X, less visibility often feels safer. Humor became part of this adaptation: sarcasm, irony, emotional distance, not as avoidance, but as protection. They also grew up during an era of constant background threat: Cold War tension, nuclear drills, adults insisting everything was fine while preparing for catastrophe. Living with that contradiction taught them to stay grounded without fully relaxing. Despite all of this, Generation X developed a distinct approach to work. They don't romanticize hustle. They don't advertise effort. They simply do what needs to be done. Their early jobs demanded responsibility long before adulthood: paper routes, retail, manual problem solving. They learned competence before confidence. After watching companies discard loyal workers, they stopped believing in institutions, but they became deeply invested in skill. They may not trust systems, but they trust ability. There's a quiet paradox at the center of Gen X psychology. They are intensely self-reliant, yet deeply dependable. They rarely ask for help, but they are often the first to show up when someone else needs it. No announcements, no recognition, just action. Their relationship with authority reflects the same pattern. They respect knowledge and experience, not titles. Leadership must be earned, not claimed. They've also lived through repeated economic shocks: early layoffs, market crashes, financial instability. That's why many Gen Xers diversify income or plan defensively, not out of ambition, but learned caution. Research shows they seek social support less often during stress, not because they're isolated, but because reliance feels risky. They handle crises well, but that strength often comes from assuming they're on their own. They also developed a different relationship with learning. Before instant access, information required effort, libraries, trial, failure. Psychology shows that effortful learning leads to deeper memory. What costs energy tends to stick. They fixed things because they had to, and in doing so, they built confidence in solving problems directly. Now they're raising children in a world of constant connection, constant visibility, constant documentation. They gave their kids what they didn't have, but they sometimes wonder if something was lost in the process. Because for Gen X, privacy isn't secrecy, it's safety. Generation X isn't superior to other generations. They're simply shaped by a narrow window in history. They grew up between analog and digital, between stability and disruption. They are the bridge, and bridges don't demand attention. They just carry the weight, quietly, consistently, without asking to be noticed. And that may be the most accurate description of Generation X there is.